was just reflecting on the phenomenon of this Citizens Foreign Policy Conference. We live at a time of such enormous challenge. We've got to be an informed citizenry. We live in a big, complicated world, lots of opportunities, lots of dangers. We need citizen engagement. I say this conference, Camden Conference, is perfect for the rest of the country.
This conference is looking to the future. It's not a referendum on any present leader or political party. I want to encourage all of us to not limit our thinking to just today's events, and let's keep our eyes on the road ahead.
What you have here is very unique, and I do think that you should take the Camden Conference on a roadshow. Have Camden out west, Camden in the Midwest, because this conference has a very unique DNA.
I think I join all the other speakers in thanking you for the extremely warm welcome that you've given to all of us, and really renewing our faith in the importance of citizenship and citizen engagement.
I have 30 minutes to tell you about what's next in a part of the world that goes back over 5,000 years. I'm going to try to give you both the good news and the bad news. I want to put this extraordinary moment in history in perspective.
We have the opportunity to invent new models, to do things differently.
This is the most terrific, mind-stretching event.
Love the fact that the audience is so engaged.
It's giving me this insight that you don't get just from reading the newspaper.
To meet people from different parts of the world or with different perspectives is just such an eye-opening experience.
Keeps you alive in terms of being a citizen of the world.
What I find here is stimulating, intriguing,
informative,
energizing,
brain-bending,
enlightened,
just brilliant.
This is the first conference I've been to where there's been a mutual standing ovation, and really my hat is off to all of you for your civic engagement in this.
Who says the American people don't care about foreign policy?
Good evening to all of you, and welcome on behalf of the Camden Conference. I'm Karen Look, President of the Conference's board, and as you just saw, we've been pursuing our mission of fostering informed discourse on world issues for many, many years. This year is our 35th. Our 35th conference, which many of you attended virtually, dealt with challenges facing Europe. Sadly, it could not have been more timely, as Putin's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine began less than 48 hours before the conference opened. Our next conference, in February of 2023, is on global trade and politics, managing turbulence. We hope that you will join us this coming February to explore the future of global trade and the challenges that arise from the interdependence of trade, politics, and concerns for our security. Although this topic was selected some 8 months ago, today we find ourselves and the world awash in these very issues. For example, the battle over Russian oil and gas and the desperate food crisis flowing from Russia's actions in Ukraine show how trade can be an instrument of politics and political power. And every day in each of our lives, we see the impact of a disrupted supply chain that affects our well-being and could affect our security. Meanwhile, the future of jobs and communities will likely depend, at least in part, on political decisions in Washington, in Beijing, and in other world capitals. Thus, the presentations and discussion at this winter's conference will be extremely relevant to our lives and to America's standing in the world. So I'm very pleased to share with you that Marketplace Morning Reports and past Camden Conference moderator David Brancaccio will be with us once again. As those of you who have watched been part of previous conferences know, he's going to be a terrific asset to us no matter what the topic, but dealing with trade and politics, I think he's going to be of particularly importance to the conversation. I hope that you'll plan to be in the audience here in the Camden Opera House or in one of our venues, other venues in Maine. As for this evening's program, a key element of U.S. engagement abroad and the pursuit of policies that enhance U.S. security is who is sitting in the Oval Office, and the knowledge, vision, and capabilities of those he or she has chosen to help him meet those global challenges and pursue opportunities for the United States. Indeed, every president is confronted daily with matters, not just those that are directly related to foreign relations, that require a decision that has national security implications. Such implications include how the world views us and assesses the policy the United States pursues. Robert Costa, co-author of Peril, is here with us tonight to help us understand the many aspects of presidential leadership and the politics that surround that highest office. My predecessor, Matt Storin, will lead the conversation with Mr. Costa, and then you will have the opportunity to ask questions. Mr. Costa's book will also be available afterwards. However, before I turn the stage over to Matt and Robert, I'd like to thank our sponsors. One is the Bangor Savings Bank, also First National Bank, and the Free Press. And I'd like to also thank our executive director, office manager, our many volunteers, and the staff of the Opera House for arranging and managing the program. Finally, I'd like to note that we have high school students from our Camden Conference in the classroom program, several of their teachers, and 2 of the 4 prize winners for our annual Bill Taylor Essay Award. Those 2 are here with us tonight. If they could stand while I point them out to you. I can't see anything, so I'll point them out. Please join me in recognizing first place winner Ruth Griffith of Ruth is from Piscataquis Community High School. The second place winner is Thomas Lowell of the Gould Academy, and he is with us also. Thomas and his father drove up from Connecticut today just to be with us. So congratulations to them, and I hope you will join me in welcoming Matt and Robert Costa to the stage.
Mostly for me. Great to see all of you here, even though I really can't quite see. I do want to clear up a little confusion right at the start. I am not the handsome, young, energetic TV reporter. That's him. And because we have students here, I thought it would be good, and I think everyone would be interested in hearing a little bit about how you got here. Not whether you got here by car or boat, but how does a young man from Bucks County, Pennsylvania...
Can you guys all hear Matt?
No.
I think maybe move it up a little bit.
That's what they used to tell me in the old days. Move it up a little bit. All right, now it's better?
Well, you got to talk...
Talk into the mic.
Straight ahead.
Yeah.
They've taught me a few things at CBS.
I'm going to hold it.
Okay.
But do tell us a little bit about your journey to this point.
Well, it's wonderful to be here with Matt, who I know from my time at the University of Notre Dame. After he was at the Boston Globe, he came to Notre Dame and was a professor there, helped out Notre Dame in many ways, and we've been friends now for almost 2 decades. And it's wonderful to be here in Camden, Maine. I really appreciate the warm welcome. This is my first time to Camden, Maine. I got to have lunch with Matt at the Yacht Club. I got a fried haddock sandwich. I don't know what his problem is. He got fried chicken. We're in Maine.
I've been here a long time.
we did have a wonderful lobster meal last night, and it just, what a beautiful place this town is. I mean, the mountains, to see all the schooners, right? It's great.
I had to explain to him what a schooner was, but...
I'm learning. I'm a quick study with this, but I'm learning. But my journey has been one of curiosity as a reporter. To be a reporter, you need to have the willingness to listen and to be willing to be what I call the front row of history. To sit there, to take notes, to think about it all. And as a young man, well, I got into journalism, frankly, to get dates. An odd thing, I know, but true. Because when I was in high school, I started writing at 16, 17 years old for my county newspaper, the Bucks County Courier-Times, 75,000 readers in the Philadelphia metro area. And they asked me to start covering concerts. So I wrote letters to record companies saying, I'm Bob Costa. I'm a music critic for the Bucks County Courier-Times, which was true. But I neglected to mention my age. And so the publicist started sending me tickets and CDs. And so I just started rolling with it. And I probably blurred some journalistic lines. I interviewed an unknown band named Maroon 5. And I said to them backstage, you should come play my high school. And they said, how much are you going to pay us? I said, nothing. And they came. The show almost didn't go on because the tour bus pulls up to my high school in suburban Philadelphia, a big public school. They get off the bus, and they go right into the home ec room and start eating all of the cookies. You can imagine the state of Maroon 5 at that time. They had enjoyed a few things on the bus. We'll leave it there. And they played a great show, and then I got to know a musician named John Mayer, who's from New England, actually. And I said to John, you should come play my high school prom. He said, how much are you going to pay me? I said, nothing. And he said, I didn't even go to my own prom. I was playing guitar. I said, well, still. But he came to my prom in 2004, the only prom he's ever gone to. It got a little complicated because he was wearing a tuxedo top, very cool jeans as a bottom, and he started taking prom pictures with my date. You know those prom pictures?
Yes.
I said, enough, John. Enough. But anyway, I wanted to get into journalism. The only reason I got into journalism was because I kind of fell into it. I mean, this is just to the students here. I was one of those people who in high school was a music journalist, but I never thought journalism was a career. It was something that seemed fun, but my parents were both lawyers. They never told me you should be a journalist, we would encourage you to be a journalist. They never discouraged it. But like everybody at Notre Dame, it seemed I was going to be a banker or a consultant. And so I went to J.P. Morgan in 2007 before my senior year, and I had a great summer doing investment banking. I made a lot of money, and like everyone, I expected to get an offer, $60,000 a year, to be an investment banker at J.P. Morgan. I sat down at the end of the summer. Everyone keep coming out of these meetings elated, happy, they're coming back next year. And I sat down, I said, it was a great summer. They said, we really appreciated having you here, Mr. Costa. Best of wishes with your career. I said, well, what do you mean? They're like, we've enjoyed having conversations with you. We're not sure you're a banker, but we wish you well. And I said, what the heck? My whole life plan was kind of just go with the flow. And when I didn't get the J.P. Morgan offer, I said, I'm just going to go have fun for a year. And that's how I fell into journalism, went to graduate school, University of Cambridge. That's another story. I went to the University of Cambridge having never been there before. My parents thought I was insane. Who moves to a town having never been there? But I did. Anyway, we could go on forever on this stuff. But people think I've had a Forrest Gump type life, and I would agree.
I just wanted to examine this idea of getting into journalism to get dates.
It's true.
Because
I would ask a girl out, I would say, would you like to get dinner? And I said, well, I have 2 tickets to see this band on Friday. Oh, yeah, okay.
No, I just wanted to point out that when I went to Notre Dame, it was all men, so I didn't know what dates were. So to get on to the more serious part of the conversation here, in your book, one of the most shocking things that I found was that just before the inauguration, or during the uncertain period between the election and the inauguration, somewhere along the line, China got the idea that we might attack them. In other words, that the president President Trump to create a distraction or something, might actually launch an attack against China, which, I mean, China is not exactly a backward country. It seems implausible. And yet, General Milley and I guess the CIA director both verified that this was the case. Do you have any explanation for why, or did Milley have any explanation for why they believe that?
It was such a fascinating moment, not only in American history, but in global history. And as Bob Woodward and I spent nearly a year working on this project, it was so interesting to us as reporters to realize that what was going on in and around January 6, 2021 was a national security story and a foreign policy story. As then President Trump was watching television in the dining room off the Oval Office, the rest of the world was watching us. And as we reported exclusively in our book, China, other adversaries, allies, went on high alert about the United States. That they were concerned that this country, this global superpower, the hegemon, was somehow falling apart, that democracy wasn't functioning. And General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, had to take it upon himself, based on our reporting, to calm the waters inside the Pentagon and inside the global community, in particular with China. And our book shows that it's important for U.S. military leaders like General Milley to have a back-channel relationship with foreign counterparts, so in moments of confusion, there can be some kind of communication that enables a frank conversation to happen. And so on January 8th, 2021, 2 days after the insurrection, Milley gets on the phone with General Lee, who he's built this rapport with over time. And he says to General Lee, don't worry, nothing's going on in terms of the U.S. trying to attack China. And the South China Sea had been hot for the last few weeks, a lot of different exercises, some close encounters. And he reassured Lee. Now, Milley has been criticized by Republicans. In their view, he was somehow tipping them off to war. But that's never what Woodward and I concluded in our reporting. To us, based on what we've seen and reviewed in our own conversations and reporting with different sources, Milley was trying to make sure the system continued to function, the global system and the American system. And January 8th, not January 6th, is likely to be remembered as a critical date in American history because that was the date where a Speaker of the House called the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and we provided a transcript in the opening of our book of that conversation, which is stunning still to read, wondering, is the U.S. nuclear arsenal under control? Is it going to be safe? The Speaker of the House openly wondering in a private conversation whether the nukes were okay, whether China was going to attack. And so Milley was doing a lot behind the scenes, and the January 6th committee, which began issuing subpoenas long after our book was published, but was operating before our book was published, has, in its last few hearings, in a way underscored everything in our book. That, especially the last hearing on Thursday night when I was on with Nora O'Donnell on CBS, all the testimony under oath, under the threat of perjury, highlighted, especially by Matthew Pottinger, the former Deputy National Security Advisor, how much this was a national security crisis. And that's why I appreciate the invitation to be here, because as a reporter who's not an expert in any way in national security or foreign policy, but spends a lot of time talking to national security officials, talking to political leaders, it's so evident to me as a reporter that these issues are constantly intertwined. And that someone like Chairman Milley, who has to deal with global issues, foreign policy all the time, the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Staff, politics matters, and if a political leader is failing to do their duty, the system often cannot hold, or at least becomes fragile.
And it does reflect well on that national security and military apparatus, but perhaps less reflective in a positive way was our withdrawal from Afghanistan. And in your book, you trace that even in the early days of the Trump administration, they were beginning to talk about doing this. And then it continued. You have some information about a debate within the Biden administration about exactly whether they would go ahead with the withdrawal, or they'd add troops, et cetera. But with all that preparation, why did it go so poorly?
in both parties now, when I'm out there in Iowa, in South Carolina, and other early voting states, talking to Democrats and Republicans, it's clear that there's a non-interventionist streak that now courses through both major political parties in this country. After what Republicans and Democrats now refer to as a forever war in Afghanistan, by 2021, the appetite for continued intervention, even if it made sense in terms of intelligence, in the military position in the Middle East, in Asia, in other parts of the world to have a presence in Afghanistan, the appetite was not there on Capitol Hill and with many of the grassroots voters, the progressive left and the conservative right, who have soured on the war. And so much of the issues on foreign policy, the positions voters take now, I really trace back in my reporting to what the decisions were under George W. Bush. And that experience has scarred people, Democrats and Republicans alike, about the need to be in Afghanistan. And so Biden gets elected with these pressures on his shoulder to get the U.S. out, knowing that Trump was able to eat into many working-class Democratic areas because of not only his pitch on economic issues and trade, but because of his pitch on foreign policy. Trump is an heir not just to Pat Buchanan and that version of populism, but also to Ron Paul in his presidential campaigns in 2008 and 2012. And Ron Paul actually did very well with military families more than any because they often bear the greatest cost. They do bear the greatest cost of intervention abroad. And so the decision on Afghanistan is something Biden did and what Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, has described privately as a very presidential decision. Biden brought in the military. He brought in everyone to have a conversation, a dialogue. But as Woodward and I reported in our book, Biden, too, had the past weighing in on his own decision. So much about Biden's decision to just get out in the summer of 2020 comes to his own experience with Obama, President Obama, on Afghanistan. Early on in the Obama presidency, when Obama had to again weigh, like so many of these recent presidents, what to do in Afghanistan. Biden's belief, based on our reporting, was that Obama was rolled by the military to stay, keep it going, keep the money coming, keep building, keep expanding the footprint. It has an intelligence worth and value, and Obama was convinced on this, President Obama was. And Biden came in not against the military, he's very close to the military, but averse to having the stay argument just be the one to readily accept as conventional wisdom. And so Biden went through the process in a way that was very much not weighted toward withdrawal, but people who were close to Biden sensed that from the first day of his presidency, that's where he was headed. And to get out, it was always going to be rough. And as the news coverage was coming in, Biden got a little frustrated. And we have a scene in our book where Biden goes like this on the Resolute desk. You know, he says to Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, and others, the buck really does stop here.
Yeah. Well, if you look back at the last few years, increasingly we have had an administration, the Trump administration, that by and large, with some exceptions, wanted to withdraw from international engagement. And then it's true that Biden went ahead with the withdrawal, but there also, I think, his state of mind is not to withdraw from international engagement. He wants to redo the Iran nuclear agreement, and also his engagement with the war in Ukraine, the fact that he unified NATO to some extent. But how do our allies look at this? I mean, are they looking at the U.S. as being unreliable? I mean, Trump could be reelected, or we could have a Republican Congress within 6 months. Is that a problem? Do people in Washington see this as a problem?
It's not necessarily a problem, in my view, but it's a reality. As a reporter for CBS, when you're in Washington as a correspondent and a reporter, you have to stay close not only to those on Capitol Hill, in the administration, in the bureaucracy, but to those who are at the embassies. And those who are at the embassies for nations that are both close to us and not so close to us, they are on high alert about the political situation in the United States. They wonder, what does it mean if the Republicans take over in 2023? What does it mean if President Biden is somehow diminished with his political capital, maybe not because of his doing, but because of inflation, Republicans attacking him? What does this all mean for U.S. foreign policy? And it creates a lot of unease about the future of the Biden presidency because there's a belief that Biden, as a former chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, brings an internationalist posture to the White House. And he has engaged on climate change. He has engaged militarily with Ukraine. He was very much in the mold of George H.W. Bush, according to his advisors, and how he went about the Russian invasion, trying to make a coalition of partners to think through how to handle this. He's been highly encouraging of making sure the funding continues on Capitol Hill, and McConnell and others have worked with him on that to an extent to make sure the money keeps flowing to Zelensky. But the rest of the world is watching and wonders, what is going on and how did we get here? And I think about that a lot as a reporter. How did we get here? And I mean, to me, it's so much, to answer your question, it's much more complicated than just talking about Biden. I think one of the key things I have as my creed as a reporter is to assume nothing. Those two words sit above my computer on my desk, assume nothing. Because every mistake I find in journalism, Matt, is when we make assumptions about what's going to happen. And we all missed the Trump story. Now, I covered Bernie Sanders and Trump before anyone else at the Washington Post. I got to know them both. I've known Trump for 10 years. I've known Bernie Sanders for about the same amount of time. And these two things were happening on both sides of the political aisle without almost any attention for a long time. And I think many of you in this room, not to come at you personally, but you probably have a lot of assumptions about what this country is, who we are, how we think, where we're going. And the one thing I would urge you is to shatter them, because I spend my whole life traveling. First time to Camden, Maine, unfortunately, I should have been here before. But I go everywhere, the Midwest, the West, the South. I was just in the South. This country is big, diverse, and not exactly where you're going. They don't think about things on an international level anymore. And just a quick story. The thing that always is seared in my memory is back in June of 2011, more than a decade ago, I began to sense something was happening. I went to Pella, Iowa, and there was a film premiere there for a movie called The Undefeated. It was a documentary about Sarah Palin. Conservatives wanted her to run for president for the Republican nomination in 2012. So I went out to Pella, Iowa to cover this premiere. And it was rumored she might jump in, and I thought it could be a real story. So I go out to Pella, Iowa, and I'm supposed to meet the director of this film, The Undefeated, kind of a propaganda right-wing film. But it was worthy of coverage. I thought, having covered the Tea Party movement, you got to keep an eye on these things. So I go out to meet the filmmaker at about 3 o'clock at a coffee shop. The premiere is that night at a theater like this in Pella, an old theater, nice theater. And so I go into the coffee shop, and it's in a small town, and there's no one there. There's a college student. The barista looks like my younger brother, very skinny, tattoos. There's like a homeless guy. There's a mother. There's nobody there. It's a big coffee shop. And I sit down. It's supposed to meet with the director at 3. It's 3:20, 3:30. I said, I mean, this guy's not well known. I'm not well known. And I say, but still, I call him up. I say, hey, it's Bob Costa. I'm here to do an interview with you for this movie. You're half an hour late. Came out to Pella, Iowa to cover this. He goes, what are you talking about? I'm here. I said, no, you're not here. There's nobody here. The homeless man stands up. And he says, I'm here. My name's Steve Bannon. Long beard, military fatigue jacket, gray hair, wild eyes. And I sit next to a guy named Stephen K. Bannon in June of 2011 in Pella, Iowa at a coffee shop. This is before he even joins Breitbart. And he's a filmmaker from Los Angeles. And I'll never forget this conversation for the rest of my life. He sits across the table from me, and he says to me, I'm going to make Sarah Palin the next president of the United States. I said, what? 1, she's probably not running. 2, who are you? And I said, she's not running. And he said, you don't understand. And he got very serious. He said, you don't understand. The middle class in this country is broken by the global elites. The establishment has ruined the middle class with the bailouts, with the Iraq war. I'm going to make Sarah Palin the next President of the United States, the future of this country is nationalism. And I said, nationalism? This is 2011. I said, what is that, some kind of Charles Lindbergh BS? Like, what, nationalism? No one uses that term. He goes, nationalism is the future. And I thought he was nuts. He wasn't. He was right. I mean, well.
He found another candidate.
He found another candidate down the line. But, I mean, I just think back to that because he saw it. That doesn't make him a genius, but he saw the anger. He saw the nationalism. And when we wonder about U.S. foreign policy, we have to be very objective. Even if you here in this room have spent careers working with an internationalist view of the world, the U.S. has a role in protecting democracy, or at least promoting democracy, global coalitions on issues like terrorism or climate change. You have to confront that might not be the reality of this country, now or in the future. And if you can learn to accept that, and I have to accept that as a reporter, you really learn that so much of what's happened over the past 15 years has had a powerful effect on how people process U.S. foreign policy. That's why I think it's so good you have these conversations, because U.S. foreign policy is not what it was under Reagan, under the Cold War. It's not what it even was under George W. Bush. Everything has a cost. Biden's withdrawal will have a cost in how people perceive him on foreign policy, the Democratic Party, intervention abroad. And Trump, his engagement, his handling of China, it has a cost for the Democratic Party. I mean, when I started covering politics, the Democratic Party was the anti-China party in a sense, about jobs and the economy and trade. Trump stole those issues. Now the Republican Party is the populist nationalist party on trade. It's fascinating, and this all plays into foreign policy.
Now, you cautioned me and us against concentrating on Biden, but he is the president. He's not doing so well, at least as far as the polls are concerned.
I thought you meant because he has COVID.
Well, he's not doing so well.
Hopefully he's doing better.
Hopefully he's doing
man.
better. So, can you see why he's failing to gain traction with the public?
I don't buy this conventional wisdom on Biden. I just don't. Because I covered Biden in the campaign very closely. Biden is the greatest political survivor of our time. Loses in '88, washed out, plagiarism charges, comes back. Anita Hill, Senate Judiciary, battered around, reputation troubled, survives, carries on. Wife and child killed in '72, carries on. 2000s, he tries to run. In '08, doesn't go anywhere. Becomes vice president for the first black president in this country, becomes a key advisor for 8 years, vice president of the United States, doesn't really want to run again, watches what happens in Charlottesville in the summer of 2017. That scene opens our book, because that's the moment Biden says, I'm going to be coming back. Now, some of his friends have told us he always was coming back. Okay, because they say Biden only has one mode, running for president. And that mode still exists. People keep saying, how can he run again? All he does is run. That's what he does. Since 1972, he's been running for over 50 years. And it doesn't stop. But Biden was, the press covered Biden like he was a nobody for months. And then what changes? Jim Clyburn, South Carolina. It's a great story, actually, real quick. Clyburn meets with Biden on the USS Yorktown in Charleston, South Carolina, right ahead of a Democratic debate. And they have a meeting, and he says, I have 2 daughters, and they've never seen a black woman on the Supreme Court. Can we make this happen? And Biden says yes, and Clyburn says, you better say it at the next debate. Clyburn's old school. We'll make a deal, but I want to hear it publicly uttered. So at the next debate, Clyburn's sitting first row with his best friend, Benny Thompson, now chairman of the January 6th committee. And the debate's gone on for an hour. There's a break. And he turns to Benny Thompson and he goes, have you heard him Biden say anything about the Supreme Court? No, no. Clyburn says to Benny Thompson, I'm going to go to the bathroom. Clyburn doesn't go to the bathroom. He goes backstage and he pulls Joe Biden aside. And he says, Joe, what are you doing? Where's our deal? Where's the mention of the Supreme Court? Oh yeah, I know. I'm for it. I'm going to do it. Joe, you better say it. Say it. And so at the end of the debate, Biden still hasn't said it. He looks down and sees Clyburn in the first row. And Biden's final answer, if you go watch it, is so awkward. Biden's going on. And then he goes, oh, and I'd like to finish by saying, I promise to nominate a black woman onto the Supreme Court. And the place goes wild, and Clyburn the next morning endorses Biden. Biden was dead politically. He had stumbled in Iowa, stumbled in New Hampshire. Clyburn's political capital lifts him out of nowhere to win South Carolina. The whole field, as COVID happens, collapses. Biden becomes the nominee. Biden wins the presidency. And when you say Biden's in a tough spot, the polling certainly indicates that. There's no argument. Let me just raise a couple points on Biden. Biden comes into the White House in January, February, March. He passes the biggest piece of legislation we've ever seen on spending in this country, $1.9 trillion rescue plan. He has to get Joe Manchin to come along, finally does, March 5th, 2021. When's the last time any of you have mentioned the $1.9 trillion rescue plan? But it happened. The biggest spending piece happened. Months later, $1 trillion on infrastructure. $1 trillion on infrastructure. Doesn't happen. No one talks about it, it seems. Because people still wonder, why isn't the social component, Build Back Better, happening? That continues to be stalled. But Biden's passed massive legislation because he had the surprise gift of a Democratic Senate after Trump fumbled in Georgia with the 2 senators. And Biden's, in his view, has accomplished a lot in terms of recovery from the pandemic, though it continues to be a problem, and the economy getting back on its feet a little bit, but he's also facing criticism that all of this spending in part led to inflation. And so much of politics is the economy. And if people feel inflation's 9-10%, then they're not going to give Biden credit. And that's really the conundrum he's in. He felt he needed a major rescue plan. But a political question for history will be, did Biden do enough to bring Republicans in early on in the presidency? He had relationships with Susan Collins. We have a scene in our book. It's a great scene of Maine, actually, where Susan Collins gets a call from Biden, and she tells her husband, keep driving around the Bangor airport because I don't want to get dropped off until he gets off the phone. And he keeps talking and talking and talking. So she keeps taking a ride around the Bangor airport. And Biden's trying to get her to buy in, but Biden's number was too high. The Republicans wanted something around $800 billion, and Biden was at $1.9 trillion. And so it never happens. But that's a great what if of the Biden presidency. If he hadn't gone that big at the start, where would he be politically now?
But suppose that the Democrats don't win those 2 seats just before the inauguration, and he's got in Georgia, and he's got a Republican Senate. What would that have done to the Biden presidency?
Well, would have had his hands behind his back. It would have been a different presidency. He's been able to pass historic spending legislation because he has those votes. Barely, but he has the votes. He got it done. But McConnell is an intriguing character because, in many ways.
You're not in Kentucky.
No, not. He, of course, blocks Merrick Garland. He overhauls the federal judiciary. He will be remembered for pushing the courts in this country to the right. You can't argue that whether you hate him or love him. He has pushed the courts in this country in a historic way to the right. The Supreme Court and the rest of the federal judiciary. But McConnell was the one person during the Obama presidency who could really work with the Obama White House. He would cut deals with Biden. If you think about remember the Republicans, the fiscal cliff? The Republicans would scurry up to it in the House, try to leverage President Obama. The famous moment in 2013 where Senator Cruz had the idea, I can get President Obama to kill Obamacare by threatening to shut down the government. All these fiscal showdowns. Who solved those fiscal showdowns? It wasn't Speaker Boehner, who had a million problems in his conference. It was McConnell working with Biden, because McConnell and President Obama didn't get along too well. But it was Biden and McConnell who actually were able to work. I remember standing outside of McConnell's office in 2011, 2012, when I'm starting out, and I would see Vice President Biden come in all the time to meet with McConnell. So there was a basis of a relationship there. To answer your question, there was a foundation of a trust. Biden's been to the McConnell Center in Kentucky to speak. But Biden made a decision when he got the Democratic Senate that he could have what he believed would be a transformational presidency. And Ron Klain, his chief of staff, was encouraging of that go big, be a big Democratic president. And Biden also recognizes that he has the left animated in his party in a significant way that he can't pretend doesn't exist. Senator Bernie Sanders almost became the Democratic nominee twice. And it was no kind of sideways campaign. These were real candidacies by Sanders. And so what does Biden do? Instead of bringing in Collins to cut the deal, he brings Sanders in on February 1st, 2021. He points up at the picture of FDR and says, that's the direction we're going, Bernie. And that's where they've gone.
But, you know, the American people, as far as we read in your reporting and others, they were not electing somebody who they thought was going to be transformational. They wanted somebody to return to normalcy. And if he had a Republican Senate, he would have had to deal in a bipartisan manner. Maybe it would have been even more frustrating for him. But I think it would have been closer to the Biden that people thought they were electing.
I think so much of 2020, though, were they electing Biden? Was it a referendum on Trump?
Yeah.
Was it about Trump's handling of COVID, the chaos of Trump? Biden was seen as a seasoned pair of hands. But I'm not sure. I talked to a lot of voters in 2020. I went probably 20, 25 states to cover different campaigns. I'm not sure that voters were yearning for bipartisanship. They were exhausted. And the reaction to the exhaustion of Trump and COVID was Biden. And you saw that with the mail-in voting, with older voters, voters who were suburban, maybe inclined toward Obama, who had drifted toward Trump because of their frustration with the global economy, frustration with immigration. They gave Trump a chance. Women, in some cases, it's always striking to me how many women did not like Secretary Clinton when I encountered them on the campaign trail, taken aback by it a lot. So they gave Trump a chance, but those were the softer suburban voters who went back to kind of a more conventional candidate. But Biden wasn't running as Mr. Bipartisan.
That's fair. I'm going to ask one more question here and then turn it out to all of you. So be thinking of your questions. There's a lot of areas still to be covered. But sticking with Biden for a moment, a lot of Democrats, as I read on social media at least, are very upset with how the press is covering Biden. The so-called liberal media and their expectations for how they should cover Biden, I suppose, play into this. What would be your view on that?
Well, Matt, I just sat down with the vice president for her longest interview, I think, in a long time, and we had a substantive, in-depth conversation. And that's how I think it should be done. Vice President Harris sat down with me in her office for CBS, answered everything I wanted to. I gave her time to have a conversation. I can't control anybody else except myself. I believe the Biden administration deserves scrutiny, but it also deserves an opportunity to have a conversation about its policies and why it's pursuing different aims. That was my approach with Trump. It was my approach with President Obama. I had a good relationship with the Obama White House. The Trump White House, that's a whole story. We can get into that. But I've known Trump for a long time, but Trump, we were investigating a lot. So, but the Biden White House, I understand. We have it in our book that President Biden is a little bit like President Trump in one sense. They both probably watch too much Morning Joe. I've had a few Biden sources say to me a couple of mornings around 9:30 a.m., bad morning, a lot of Joe, a lot of Mika, hearing it from the big guy. And I said to them, this sounds exactly like what I would hear from the Trump people. Oh boy, spent 3 hours watching Morning Joe this morning. Because they're very different presidents, but they're similar in the sense that they're sensitive to how they're being perceived, how their presidencies are being evaluated. Biden comes in what he believes is a crisis moment for American democracy, just days after an attack on the Capitol. He calls it, in his inaugural address, a winter of peril. And I said to Woodward, that's our title, Winter of Peril. The publishers thought that was a little lyrical. Peril was fine. But we did use the quote in the beginning of the book. And Biden comes in with, he believes, an economic crisis, a COVID crisis, a democracy crisis. And he believed he tried to tackle them with ambition and with transformational, progressive policies, a decision, progressive, no doubt. And
but how do you feel the press, I'm not thinking of you in this context.
Sure.
How do you think the press generally has treated Biden? He doesn't
Tough
want to make
question.
any enemies.
That's true. But I think the president, look, when I sat down with Vice President Harris a few days ago, the press is always at its best when it focuses on substance and issues. It doesn't make itself the story. And whether it was with Trump or Biden now, when the press becomes the story and people start to pay too much attention to the press, you realize something's off. The greatest joy I have as a reporter is recognizing, and it's like a calm that comes over you, that I'm not the story. I'm not the story. I'm an observer and chronicler of history. Sometimes have to nudge and push those in power for answers, but I'm not the person in power. And I think the press under Trump became such a central story, sometimes necessarily, because we were driving investigations. It felt like every week at the Washington Post, I was on Brian Williams on MSNBC, scoop, 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 this investigation, this thing from the DOJ, this congressional investigation, that we were front and center and in an aggressive posture. And many of President Biden's supporters don't love that the press has continued in some aspects to have that posture. So I think the criticism of the press on Biden comes from a place where they feel Biden doesn't merit the same approach that was taken to Trump. And I understand that point of view, but I would just urge people who are angry with the press to understand that the press is being aggressive. It can be annoying. Sometimes it can be tone deaf. Sometimes it can have a blind spot and take something more seriously than it should. But at the end of the day, you still rather have an aggressive press than not.
Good, well said. So we're going to turn the lights up, and we're going to turn the questioning over to all of you. If you can raise your hand, we have volunteers who will bring a mic to you. And I'd like to have you identify yourself by name and where you're from. If you're a student, what high school you're from or college you're from. And we will go from there. Do we have a first over here? Yes, so this gentleman over here.
Terrific hearing from you, Mr. Costa. My name is Tom Lowell. I'm from Connecticut. Quick question. New York Times this week published a series of columns from Paul Krugman, Bret Stephens, and others entitled What I Got Wrong. Krugman did a mea culpa on inflation. Bret Stephens wrote about how he was too harsh on Trump voters. If you wrote a What I Got Wrong column, what would it be about?
Great question. What I got wrong. What did I get wrong?
Oh, it's not that hard.
I'll tell you exactly what I got wrong. So Bob Woodward and I signed this book deal in December 2020. And I quit PBS. They thought I was negotiating when I said, I'm going to go write a book. They said, oh, we'll make this work for you. I said, that's okay. It's not trying to renegotiate. I'm going to go write this book. So I resign from MSNBC, go on leave from the Post. I'm all in on the book, focusing. And around December, late 2020, early 2021, around just January 2nd, January 3rd, I started to feel something was weird in the air with Trump. Something's weird. My sources at the White House, my sources around Trump, I've known him for a long time, interviewed him too many times. Something's up, something's dark. And I heard from a person close to Giuliani that Giuliani and Bannon were huddled at the Willard Hotel. And I went to the Willard Hotel on January 5th, 2021. I was there from around 9:30 at night to 11:30 at night, trying to get in to see Rudy. And because I didn't have a hotel key card, I was not allowed in. The security was being very tight that night, so I had to stay outside in the freezing weather. And I was with the mob outside. The city was empty, but circling the hotel, almost like soldiers, were Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. And I kept saying to my sources close to Giuliani, let me in, I want to see this war room, I want to see Bannon, I want to see Giuliani. They wouldn't let me in, but I kept seeing these crowds fight with police officers. No one else was there from the press. This is late at night, freezing cold. Because of COVID, Washington's empty. It was the police, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and inside Bannon and Giuliani. But no one knew Bannon and Giuliani were there, but I knew they were there. And around 11:30 at night, I call Bob Woodward, and I say, and I don't know why, but I always just call him Woodward. I say, Woodward, because we're both Bobs, so it's confusing. I say, Woodward, I can't get in. I can't see Bannon and Giuliani, but I know they're here. They're up to no good. And I said, it's 11:30. I said, I'm freezing my ass off. I'm going to go home. I've been here for 2.5 hours. It was a little unsettling seeing all these right-wing extremists walking around with military-type things. And Woodward goes, yeah, that's right. Take all the notes you can, get the scene, but come back. So I went home at around 11:30 at night on January 5th, 2021. When I was outside the Willard Hotel, I was the only reporter. And what I got wrong, and I will regret for the rest of my life, is not just buying a damn hotel room at the Willard Hotel.
Another question. That was a good question. Over here. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Nancy Steiner, and I'm from New York. And I'm wondering, I love that you keep the expression assume nothing. I'm wondering if we are foolish in assuming that our democracy as an experiment is in danger.
Good question. I am an eternal optimist, maybe wrongly. Maybe that's a bad assumption, but I do believe as a reporter, I leave my trips always more enthusiastic about this country than not, as dark as things are. And I was in Washington at the Willard. I've seen the darkness. I've seen the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. I've been confronted by them multiple times. I've seen it out there. But I also have seen people pay attention now that this country is fragile. People are more active, I've found. They're despondent in part, but I think you can get to a very dark place if you spend your entire life by seeing the United States through the prism of your phone. And so many people now do what I call doom scrolling. And they believe that Twitter and social media in the news is the United States. And that's a channel that can drift and pull you into a riptide of depression. And I would just urge you to remember what I see as a reporter is not that constant. People are complicated. People sometimes have extreme views, right, left, but they can drift back to normal. They can sometimes be rational. Sometimes people are provoked by strange personal grievances, odd things that I don't see a collective problem, but I do very much worry about this country on one particular front, and that's truth and information. You go to state capitals around the country, it's changed even in the decade plus I've been a reporter. State capitals that I go to that used to have 20 reporters now have 5, 6, 3. And you wonder who's paying attention to those in power. The local media has so often disappeared. Yes, some papers do persist, college-educated voters, those who are just interested in the news continue to read, but there's no revenue sources. Nonprofit journalism is becoming the go-to model. And so when local and state news, that's why I think it's so important for you to come to community events. When communities disappear in terms of news organizations, what happens? The nationalization of the news. Everything now is Trump and Biden, the Democrats. It's not about so often your senator or your community leaders. It's about what's happening at the national level. Everything is processed through cable news, through broadcast television, through social media. And that, to me, has a corrupting effect on truth and civic culture, because then we just become passengers in a nationalized news environment, and it makes people who are on the extreme often get a lot of attention, and those who are doing the good work at things like the Camden Conference, in local towns, get no attention. And when people who do good work get no attention, it creates real problems for the country, because it's dispiriting when you're going about a lot of things, when you're an educator. I know I've met some great teachers tonight, and so much good is happening, but all you see in the channel of your phone is the terribleness. So remain optimistic, because look whose people came out tonight, even amid COVID and all this, to try to be part of a community. And this Camden hasn't fractured clearly, and the country hasn't fractured, and you got to stay positive, but also recognize that if you can teach, if you can mentor people. And the most important thing I've ever seen, in 2016, no one talked. I would go to Milwaukee, Ohio, And I'll go to Starbucks. Starbucks are a great place to report because people are okay with a random stranger coming up to them in a Starbucks. Because it's kind of the one place in a town, especially in these suburban areas where people do pass each other like ships in the night, where it's okay to talk to someone. And so few people talk anymore. And the silence at the Starbucks always struck me. And the one thing, if you really want to improve this country, and I'm not here to offer any political advice, but if you want to improve this country civically, talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends. The isolation in this country is so real. People living on their phones and on TV. People don't even talk when they're in town or at a restaurant. Talk to people, because the isolation is what feeds the anger.
Up here. Go ahead.
My name is Tom McLaughlin. I live in Camden in the summer and Amesbury, Massachusetts in the winter. This is a bit of a follow-up on what you were just talking about, Bob. It's great to hear your experience and stuff. You talk to a lot of people. So could you describe one person that you've spoken to who is a Trump fan who almost persuaded you?
Well, persuasion's not the game here, but I mean, I did a story across Pennsylvania in the final week of 2016, because as a reporter, I really believe you've got to get out there. So I said to the Washington Post at the time, I'm going to drive from the Ohio border to the New Jersey border, across Pennsylvania, from west to east. And I was by myself. I had a photographer meet me in a couple places, and I went along the Pennsylvania Turnpike the entire way. And I just kept meeting people in town after town who were for Trump. And I was especially struck by people who were in the Christian evangelical community who said to me, I was with Cruz, I was with Bush, I was with Romney, they failed us. This country is changing. We want to have Supreme Court justices who do what we want them to do, to get rid of Roe v. Wade. We want conservatives on the court. And Trump's our hammer. We don't care about what Trump says. We don't care what about his moral past. We want a winner. We want a winner. And they wanted to upend the American political establishment. And then I would see people who saw, in Western Pennsylvania especially, there are no factories that are, the monster factories that are still there, like carcasses, haunt these towns. And it's a cliche to say you go to a diner in Western Pennsylvania, but how many of you have been to diners in Western Pennsylvania? They're a real thing, and people are very unhappy. And they went to Trump. And some of them went to Biden this time around. It's not like they're a fixed Trump voter. But I was convinced that Trump would win, not that he was. David Brooks has a great phrase, Trump was the wrong answer to the right question, which is how a lot of people explained him to me in 2016. And I went to the Washington Post, and I said, Trump's going to win the election. I just spent a week in Pennsylvania, and I grew up in Pennsylvania, and I've never seen anything like this. I mean, I've been to Western Pennsylvania my whole life. I would go to small towns. The whole town was Trump signs. In the suburbs of Pennsylvania, and this is where I knew the polls were wrong, I'd go to Starbucks outside of Philly, and I would say to a suburban mom, who are you for? I hate them both. I hate them both. Okay. Who are you voting for? I'll never tell you. Okay. Who are you voting for? 4 or 5 questions in. As a reporter, you always got to be persistent and annoying. 4 or 5 questions in. Who are you for? And this is the suburban mom, upper middle class, Bucks County, Pennsylvania, Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. Trump, 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 Trump. And I said, oh boy, because they're lying to me. Some of them would even say Clinton, then we would drift to Trump. There's a social stigma that's not being seen in the polling. Plus, the non-voter was coming out. The non-voter, which is it's like a rare fish. The person who doesn't participate suddenly coming out. And that's often not caught in political data gathering. And Trump, I said to the editors, he's going to win. No, he's not going to win. But I saw it because the anger was there, and in many ways, Trump was the first people were craving an independent president, like a Ross Perot, a populist. But he comes in, and I interviewed Trump in March of 2017. He called me in March of 2017 after he was president, and he said the Republicans' health care bill collapsed. He said, I can't believe what I'm doing. He said this on the record. I went along with these Republicans, and it's all falling apart. Now, it was in March 2017, but ultimately Trump made a decision because he was not prepared for the presidency to take what Paul Ryan put in his lap, Mitch McConnell put in his lap, and make it his program. Yes, he had his border wall pursuit, but at the end of the day, Trump pursued a Republican presidency. And I do often wonder for history, if Trump had actually prepared for the presidency to govern as an independent and had governing experience, what would have been different? Because he adopted the Republican platform, and it made him in many ways a typical Republican president with an atypical personality.
What you said about Pennsylvania reminded me of the old saying among political reporters that Pennsylvania is, you have Pittsburgh and you have Philadelphia, and everything in between is Alabama.
But the edges became quietly Alabama.
Yeah, yeah.
In 2016 and
yeah.
2020.
There's a question in the back, and then we'll have one up on the far side over here, Dave.
Thank you very much for being here. My name is Bert Ely. I'm a banking consultant in Alexandria, Virginia, inside the Beltway. My question relates to the foreign situation. China has a lot of economic problems domestically, and in recent days they become more evident. My question is this: to what extent are our foreign affairs officials sufficiently primed for what China's problems are, and to what extent China might see almost a need, in light of what's going on in Ukraine, to make a serious move on Taiwan?
It looms over everything in Washington right now. What is Xi's calculation for Taiwan? And every conversation I have with a foreign policy official, with a member of Congress, is about, does China see this moment? And there's a debate inside the national security community in Washington about what exactly is China doing. Do they see this as the ultimate moment? If Biden's capital is diminished politically, is this the moment to come in? Is the U.S. exhausted by the spending in Ukraine? Clearly, the U.S. has no interest in the U.S. voter in intervening militarily in Ukraine. If they are watching Ukraine and seeing the U.S. is not sending troops to fight Putin, is only sending money, what could be done with Taiwan? And there's a belief now that China finally has the ability to go into Taiwan and to hold it. And there was a debate for years about, and still is a debate, what China's capacity is militarily to go in and actually seize Taiwan. Now, there are many things China could do up to the point of an incursion and an invasion. It could try to do different things with its navy, which continues to grow. But China is the ultimate variable, and it's really actually almost more front and center in a way in many private discussions in Washington on foreign policy than Ukraine, because there's a belief that Ukraine will continue. It's going to be inch by inch. It's going to be very tragic in some ways, but it's going to be something that drags on for some time, months if not years. But China, at any moment, they're wondering, does China wait until 2023 when the Republicans are controlling the House? Does it wait for the global economy to take a turn, perhaps for the worse? Or, I mean, I'm sure there are others in this room who have experience on China that I would love to hear from after this about where China is actually going, because it's a raging debate in Washington, and I haven't heard a clear consensus based on my conversations with officials.
Question up in the balcony.
I need to turn this on. Yes, hi. My name is Whitney Lloyd. I'm a retired American history teacher. We live in Cleveland, Ohio, and we have a house in Tenants Harbor, Maine, so about 40 minutes from here. My wife and I have been very carefully watching as a lot of you in the audience, I think all 8 debates of the January 6th investigation, and this hasn't come up tonight, but we're all wondering, ultimately, as each one more comes out, how the illegal things and the incredibly dangerous activities that are going on at that time between the election and the inauguration. And my concern is and I've been very impressed with them. They've been masterly done. And Liz Cheney's just remarkable what she's done for this episode. But what are they hoping will come out of this in terms of, will it impact the 2022 election, or will it keep Trump out of running again 2024? Will it put Trump in jail? Nobody knows, but what are they hoping? They keep extending them and saying this is the last one, then no, we're going to do more. We're going to come back in September. And I think it's an amazing process. But I'm wondering what are their wildest hopes might come out of these hearings?
This is a moment that is a reckoning for the Republican Party, a crossroads, and it's a reckoning and crossroads for Attorney General Merrick Garland. After watching these hearings and digesting the testimony, the witnesses who are speaking truth about what they really saw behind the scenes, whether it's the Pence security detail fearing for its life to those inside the White House who watched the president sit idle, does the Republican Party still rally behind this man, Donald John Trump, if he seeks the nomination again in 2024? And there's a rumbling in some quarters of the right in this country about whether that will happen again. Look at the New York Post today, the Wall Street Journal today. Maybe not here in Camden, Maine, people are reading those two, but those two papers owned by Rupert Murdoch, both today in their editorial page said Trump's unfit for office. And this is a paper that Trump had talked to just a few weeks ago for an interview, the New York Post. So the Republican Party, I interviewed Liz Cheney for CBS Sunday Morning. It was a great interview, not to tout it, but if you go on YouTube and search Liz Cheney Sunday Morning, really had a contemplative interview with her about her party. Where does this party really go from here? She faces her own test in 3 weeks, her primary race in Wyoming. Does this party, though, the January 6th hearing, we're never going to maybe convince the Trump voter to totally flip, but does it soften the Trump voter on Trump to say maybe we'll give a shot to Glenn Youngkin of Virginia, Ron DeSantis of Florida? Now, you may not like them if you're a Democrat here, but the point is, for some of these Republicans, can they just move the party away from Trump? The trickier question is Garland. What does Garland do with this? And the question is really for lawyers in this room, what is criminal intent? Did Trump have the intent to disrupt Congress? Yes. Was that a prosecutable crime if he believed in some way that the election was stolen, a false claim? For Merrick Garland, that's a tricky question because there may be a mass amount of evidence that Trump tried to disrupt democracy, obstruct Congress, pressure his vice president, weaponize his vice president against American democracy. But is that something that Merrick Garland can take into federal court and say, I can close this case with a jury? And to prosecute a former president is a weighty and politically and emotionally, not emotionally, it's politically and legally charged issue. And Garland's thinking through that very hard. It's not going to be, I don't have an answer of where he's going to land on this, but it's not going to be easy for him. But what we do know, and Woodward and I remember the moment we found it, this was very serious what happened. Woodward and I would do these interviews. We would transcribe them. We'd sit down with people for hours. And I was telling somebody before this, they said, how do you get all this information out of people? Hours. We're having an hour here tonight. You're hearing a few things. But if I sat down with you and asked you about your parents, okay, you don't know me. And if I asked you about your parents, you have probably 5 to 10 stories you tell about your parents, because that's what you do in a social setting. You'll go up to a certain line about your parents. And there are things you'll share at a dinner, maybe a long dinner, you have even some more in your holster. But you have a few stories that you have honed and forged over time that define the parents and for public consumption. But if I sat down with you in my house and I gave you a chicken salad sandwich, I gave you some coffee, maybe a glass of wine, I sat down with you for 2 or 3 hours, then 4 or 5 hours, and I asked you to come back the next day. We had some more food, some quiet, and I had a chronology of your entire life in front of me. And I had scenes I had picked up from other friends of you about your relationship with your parents. There would come a time where you would look at me, put your glass down, and say, all right, let me tell you the truth about my parents. And that happened again and again in reporting this book. That people have stories they tell themselves about the truth, stories they tell themselves about themselves, but at the end of the day, there's only one truth. Your parents are who they were, for good and for ill, What happened on January 6th in the White House and in around it was what happened. And people love to spin stories in their life, but it's often kind of brutal and not that fun. And we discovered at one point the John Eastman memo. 2 pages, 6 parts, a blueprint for a coup in the United States of America. To throw the election back into the states by using the vice president to discredit the election. If it had happened, and it was this close to happening, this close, you would have had a democratic crisis, a constitutional crisis, unlike anything you've ever seen. And the January 6th committee is doing important work, whether you are a Republican or not, because it's bringing out testimony from people under oath. And that, to me, is important for the historical record. Even if you can't stand Liz Cheney, you should listen to when people testify under the threat of perjury about what happened.
We have some hands up in the back, in the center, and one down here as well. We'll get to everyone.
Yeah, just say it. I'll repeat it. Hey, you can ask it. I'll repeat it. Okay.
In listening to you, first I want to congratulate you because it can't be easy. You are extremely bright researcher and reporter in a world of people, pundits, that are obviously affected by ratings, news ratings. Like you say, a lot of times the reporters become the story. But I think it's really difficult when you have a passion, how emotions play into it. You've done a lot of investigative research. You've done a lot of writing. It's had to affect you emotionally. And how do you maintain an objectivity and yet react to your natural emotions?
It's a good question.
And how does that bias or affect you in terms of your writing and your reporting?
Fair question. It's about emotion. And I think I get too much credit for this, Frank. I get too much credit for this because I don't bring emotion into my work. And people go, how do you not bring emotion into your work? Oh my God, it's crazy. He's crazy, whether it's right or left, but you can guess who they're talking about. But they say, how do you not bring emotion in? And I think as much as I'm on television, I've hosted a TV show, it seems, oh yeah, you're out there. At the end of the day, I have a job. My job is to report. It's to gather information, find the truth, get as near to the truth as you can, and share it with an audience that's busy with their own lives and doesn't have time to go do what I can, which is gather facts. If I go to the auto mechanic with my car, I expect the auto mechanic to fix the car. I don't expect the auto mechanic to start telling me how to vote. If I go to the dentist, I expect the dentist to fix my teeth, not to start telling me how to vote or to start emotionally weighing in on the state of American democracy. My point is, for some reason, people in the media are seen as emotional creatures who should bring the emotion into the work. Now, if I'm dealing with a tragedy on a human level, I'm with someone who just lost a spouse or a family member, I'm not going to be robotic. I'll have emotion in the moment of trying to understand their point of view. But politically, it's irresponsible to start thinking my personal emotion should somehow weigh how you think of the world. When I was growing up, I loved Tim Russert because he came to Notre Dame when I was a senior, just before he died. And because Russert had fun with politics, but didn't bring his emotion into it, and just did the work of political journalism. And Gwen Ifill, I was so lucky to be her successor, honored. She tragically died in 2016. But she had a method that was like Russert, bring people together, have a conversation that's nonpartisan. And I think keeping my emotion to the side, sure, sometimes it's tough. Sometimes politicians can rough you up a little bit, and you want to start saying, hey, but I've learned resist. I'll give you a quick example. One time I was interviewing Donald Trump when he was candidate, and he said, that's fake news. And I go, okay. He goes, you never respond to that. I go, because I don't want to engage on that. And my point to him was, when he says fake news, what he wants you to do as a reporter is respond. Because once you respond, I'm not fake news, then you're engaging, you're talking about yourself, not the subject at hand. You're being defensive. That's what he wants. Donald Trump and others who don't love the press often want to draw the press into a political debate, an emotional debate, because they want to paint the press with a political brush. And the collapse of the press as an institution in this country will come when it is seen as a political agent. And if we are not seen as a political agent, we can have integrity as an institution. But if we're seen as political, we might as well go home.
We got about 10 more minutes. Next question in the back.
Hi, my name is Martina Straka. I go to Oceanside High School in Rockland. I was wondering, what is any advice you'd give to any youth interested in pursuing a career in journalism? And what are some of the struggles you faced in your early career?
Well, I think for someone who's in high school, thinking about college, the toughest thing for young people today, I'm 36, but I'm talking about people who are 18, let's say, to 25, 10 years younger than me, and maybe the next generation, is what I was saying about the phone. You spend your whole life now watching others your age live their lives curated for Instagram. And that can be crippling for you professionally and personally if you start to constantly watch others and compare others to yourself and say others are doing this, they're taking vacations here, they're getting this internship, they're living in this city. And you can start to feel depressed and alone that you are not succeeding. And so many young people I know who are very bright, very ambitious, they wash out. They wash out. And it's not because of anything that happened at work. It's because they mentally can't handle that their career is not revving up. My career seemed to be a joke for a long time. I've had a lot of early success, but it wasn't always like that. When I was at University of Cambridge, I went to University of Cambridge because I met a professor when I was studying abroad who said I should apply there because we had a good tea. I was interning in the House of Commons, and my MP, who I was working for, was late for a meeting with this professor, so he said, have a tea with him, keep him occupied. And after the conversation, he said, you should apply to Cambridge. I said, all right, I will. I applied to one graduate school, the University of Cambridge. I got in. I go, having never been there. When I'm at Cambridge, I start to apply to all these journalism jobs. Washington Post rejects me. Wall Street Journal rejects me. Associated Press. Every place rejected me. Partly because I had no money to fly back to do interviews. This is before Zoom. And I was 22, and they said, if you want to get an internship or a fellowship here, you need to come back to do an interview. I said, well, you got to fly me from Heathrow to New York. What are you talking about, son? You're 22 in London. You got to pay your way. And I didn't have money to go. And the one person that would offer me a job over the phone was a conservative magazine called National Review. And I said to National Review, which was offering me a job of $50,000 a year, which at the time seemed like $1 billion, I said, I would love this job, but under one caveat. Could I never write a conservative article? Can I just be a guy who reports? They said, that's weird. We've never hired anyone like this. I said, I understand, but I'm a good reporter. Just let me cover the Republicans like someone at Car and Driver would cover Ford. Like, I know I'm working for a niche publication, but let me cover it like a beat. They said, again, this is weird. Most people who come here want to be the next George Will. I said, actually, I want to be the opposite. So please never pressure me to write an editorial of any sort. But they brought me on to their credit. And for 4 or 5 years, I was at National Review magazine covering the right. And I was overweight. No one gave a hoot about what I was doing most of the time. But I hustled. I kept going to the Capitol. I kept working. People who I'm even friends with now were so condescending to me. National Review. But I believed that I could just be a good reporter. And I actually never believed my career would go anywhere. But in 2013, the government shuts down. And who's the person who suddenly has every single cell phone of House Republicans and every Gmail? Me. And I wrote a story. I broke the news that the shutdown was over. And it was a tweet. And it became, the Wall Street Journal and the CNBC wrote articles about this tweet. That it was a tweet that shook the markets. I said it was over, and the market soared after my tweet because the traders were all following my Twitter. And the Washington Post called me up, recruited me, and said, we're sick of you beating us. Just come work for us. But I'm telling you, so many people who are much smarter than me, much better looking, have all quit. You just can't quit. And you can't start getting depressed. Oh, I'm not doing, all these people are having such great jobs and time. You have to have perseverance and patience. It's the hardest thing in the world is patience.
We have time for just one more question, and I believe we've got one right in the center here in the back. Hand is up, sure.
My name is Andrea Rudolph from New Jersey, currently in Lincolnville, and I have a question about how political the press is. You're speaking about reporting facts, but yet you look at Fox News, you look at CNN, and they are so biased. It's not about facts anymore, it's about political ideology. And that really seems to detract from what we all need to know, which is what is really going on.
The Trump era certainly stirred things up, but I'm optimistic about this. CBS, I joined them in February. I mean, I've been able to have long sit-down interviews with the Vice President of the United States, with Liz Cheney, Glenn Youngkin. I mean, when I guest hosted Face the Nation 2 weeks ago, I had Glenn Youngkin, one of the most, even if you don't like him, one of the rising Republicans in this country, serious interview with the Vice President, serious interview. So it's just about the work. And CNN is trying to move in a more news direction. The new president there is Chris Licht. I've known him for years, good guy. I know CNN's trying to do news. We'll see how that project goes. I'm optimistic for them. MSNBC has some great reporters there. I went to high school with Hallie Jackson, coincidentally, in Philadelphia. She's a great reporter. There are many others there. So the great reporting is also happening, but you mentioned television. And there's great reporting happening in the papers, but it doesn't get enough attention. And I don't know how to bring more of attention to it. That's part of the problem here, that we process the media now through the clips we see on social media and the fights we see on cable. But the media has to stay serious, not boring, but serious, and realize that a lot of the country's tuning out for various reasons. People are tuning out because the news is dark to them. They're tuning out because they see it as too political. And I every day assume nothing, but it's not just about stories and about topics and where this country is going to go. It's about the media. The media, I mean, this country, when you say the partisanship in the media, it's actually a recent phenomenon. If you do a study of American journalism, this media in this country, the Washington Post, the great papers of this country, up until World War II, were highly political. There were Republican papers. Our great-grandparents would read Democratic papers, evening papers, morning papers. It had real political tilts. But it was CBS, Edward R. Murrow, it was the newspapers in the 60s and the 70s moving in a more nonpartisan direction, a mass audience. To get the most revenue, you need a mass audience. So the political papers of the 20s and the 30s and 40s faded as radio and television and mass audience to get the most revenue became the business model. But it's a recent half-decade, a half-century phenomenon. It wasn't always the norm in American journalism. And so as much as you may have anger about how this is evolving now, and Matt probably has some thoughts on this as well, never have the expectation that what has been will always be. This has been a rough and tumble country since the Revolution. Then we had a Civil War. What we're going through now is tumultuous. It can be very unsettling, but this is America. It carries on with its rough edges.
Well put. I want to make a couple of concluding remarks, but first I want to say that Bob Robert is going to do a book signing upstairs on the 3rd floor. If you are going to go, you want to go out these doors in the back and take the stairway on the north side over here up to the 3rd floor. There's plenty of room up there. The windows are open. It's a well-aired room. And there will be copies of Peril for sale, credit card only. And meanwhile, I would like to just thank Bob for coming here. I want to say that if Joe Biden consistently has been running for president, it's clear that you do nothing but report 24/7. I don't know when you sleep, although he appeared to sleep last night, but this is...
I had good lobster, so... Makes us sleep really easy.
So on behalf of the Camden Conference, thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Appreciate it.